I used to lock myself in the bathroom stall every single morning and ride out my panic attacks. For almost 20 years of that 27 years, I spent living with, fear, shame, ignorance and embarrassment around honestly believing that if I pressed my hands hard enough against the wall that I could ride out the panic attack, that everything would eventually be okay.
Welcome back to another Limitless Podcast. I'm grateful today to have someone from Sydney with me. Tim, a warm welcome to you.
Nick, thank you very much. And it is a warm welcome being a very hot summer here in Sydney.
Fantastic. I feel like you might be my other brother in another part of the world. We're going to dig into mental health, men's health, and someone who's involved in men's group as well. And I was sharing, Tim, with you when we were chatting about this earlier. When I said a few years ago I was going to start a men's group over in Singapore, people were laughing at me, and actually some of the women I asked who were running women's leaders group I asked for tips, they didn't even believe me. So kudos to you for doing it. We're going to dig in all of this today, Tim. But first of all, please introduce yourself to the listeners and a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, sure. So I spent about 27 years in corporate, banking and finance, working sales and strategy roles, mostly new businesses, clean slate opportunities. But I've spent nearly all of my life in Sydney. I've travelled, but most of my life has been in Sydney. For almost 20 years of that 27 years, I spent living with, fear, shame, ignorance and embarrassment around my own mental health challenges. And, with the benefit of age and wisdom, and, I'm now in my 50s, I look back as to some of the reasons and the causes and, some of the trends and patterns now that I'm heavily involved in the men's mental health and suicide prevention space as to why and how that came about in my own life and I know we'll get there, but ultimately led me to where I am. And so, I look back and look at my childhood and this, what I thought was a normal level of angst and anxiety that evolved into anxiety by the time I was in my 20s, to the point where I was having daily panic attacks to start my day at work, and untreated without any professional help and support, they evolved into panic attacks about having panic attacks. And of course, without doing anything about it, by the time I'm in my 30s, I've got what was later determined as depression. Roll the clock forward and I'm now in my early 40s. I look in the mirror, the guy I see staring back at me is somebody that I thought that I would never be. Middle-aged, separated and on the fast lane to divorce. And at that stage, I didn't really have much of a support network around me. I thought my sole purpose was to work hard, provide for my family, love and care for my family. And so I kind of buried myself in work and ignored the fear, shame and ignorance that I experienced around my mental health challenges. But that's kind of it for me to kick us off.
Wow, that's a big opening as well, Tim. So I'm hearing that in your corporate job, you started by having some panic attacks and then have panic attacks about the panic attacks, you said, eventually depression and divorce as well. And if you take us back to that moment when we were going through all those challenges, how were you coping then?
Yeah, I used to lock myself in the bathroom stall every single morning and ride out my panic attacks, and they would take about 5 to 10 minutes. And the reason why I'd do that was because it was the only thing I thought that I could do, honestly believing that if I pressed my hands hard enough against the wall that I could ride out the panic attack, that everything would eventually be okay. But it also allowed me to hide my fear, shame and embarrassment, pretend to myself and the rest of the world, and particularly my colleagues, that everything was okay, when in fact it obviously wasn't. So just kept burying myself in more and more work, pretending that everything was okay and hiding the challenges that I was having. And to be fair, we're going back a while ago now, and attitudes towards mental health, especially in the workplace, have changed. But I honestly believe that if I was to walk out, tell my boss what had just happened and what I'd been experiencing and how long I'd been experiencing for, that I'd be locked up in a white coat and put into a padded cell. So things have changed, but fear, shame, ignorance and embarrassment and was pretty much how I buried myself. That well-trodden path of suck it up, soldier on, bury it deep, and just keep going.
Yeah, that's grinding through that hard working and feeling that you need to provide for your family as well, as you said earlier, Tim. And that I hear that from so many men. But how did you then cope? I mean, also many others pick up perhaps cope with alcohol or gambling or sex addiction and so on. What was going on? How could you really cope through that? Were you just grinding and white knuckling it through, Tim, or?
Most of the time I was probably really lucky that when I started to have kids, and I was in my mid-30s by the time I was having kids, I started to really intensely focus on my health, and running in particular was a big part of that. So literally found out we were pregnant, stopped smoking, and started picking up running. And running gave me an outlet where I could, expel my physical angst and energy, where I could focus on something other than all of the shit that was going on in my life at the time, the pressures at work, the challenges I was facing, but also give me a sense of normalcy when I was left to my own thinking, which can sometimes be a bit of a dangerous thing. So exercise has always played a big role in my life in terms of helping me keep balanced. And we all know there's an obvious connection between physical health and mental health and well-being.
Yeah, so kudos for picking up a healthy coping mechanism, then exercise, as you said, take care of your physical and mental health. But what about your social health at that time, Tim? How did you cope with that? Did you also do something for your social health?
I really didn't until I was in my early 40s. In fact, when I turned 40, and at that stage, I developed a soccer team. You know, I spent my weekends standing on the sidelines of life, watching my kids and my ex-wife play football. And by football, I'm talking about round ball, the global game. And turned to one of the other dads and said, "Look how much fun they're having. You know, why aren't we doing this?" But before then, you know, I didn't really have many friendships at work. Work was about working for me. I put the suit and tie on, I went in and I did my job. I took it seriously. And that was like a uniform that masked everything else that was happening. I'd leave all my shit at the front door. I'd have my panic attacks, and then I'd do it again when I left the end of the day. And so it wasn't till I actually got to my early 40s, when I turned 40, that the soccer team was started. And that then for the first time gave me an outlet. Otherwise, you know, all of my friends were, you know, a few school friends from, when I was much younger, but we didn't talk about these kind of challenges and difficulties, divorce and separation, and certainly the mental health challenges I was facing. Lots of kids' dads from my soccer team that were in my mobile phone with things like, you know, Liam's dad and Blazer's dad, you know, labels. I didn't even know them well enough to have a conversation. And I never really made friends at work because I made a clear delineation between my work life and my personal life. And so, you know, I woke up in my early 40s and realized I didn't have any social connections. I didn't have men that I could reach out to connect and support and have a chat about what was actually going on in my life. So, you know, I kind of had to build it.
Yeah. So I heard, and social football team, and so on. As you said, you know, the kids are having fun there together. Why don't we do it as adults? And that's something that I'm reflecting on a lot as well, Tim. And in my trainings and workshop, I said, let's be curious about what we love to do as a child and dig them out as an adult. Just because we get busy, we shouldn't really stop those moments. So I'm really happy to hear that you dig into that as well. Was that sort of your turning point? Was there a rock bottom here, Tim, in order for you to hit that, or you sort of just managed to pivot across to getting into a better life?
No, I think I really didn't wake up and realize that well-trodden path of suck it up, soldier on, man up wasn't working. What I was doing and trying for those 20 years wasn't working. I was starting to feel better. I was starting to feel more connected once I started playing team sports, but I really didn't turn the corner until I started to get some professional help and support for my mental health challenges as a result of my separation and divorce. And it was that point that I went, you know what I'm doing, this burying my head in the sand, is not working, and I need to take a different approach, and I can't do it myself, and I actually need some help. So I was lucky that I had started to put some of these foundations in place while I was going through and getting professional help and support. You know, I was starting to exercise more. I was getting involved in team sports, and I was starting to build, whether I knew it or not, communities of men around me that would ultimately be great and beneficial for my social support.
what I like and what I'm hearing here, Tim, is you not only address this physically and mentally by the exercise and so on, you also added team sport, having the social health, the connection there, and then also you doubled down as you went through divorce and by getting that individual personal support as well, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and some of that was very intentional. Some of that was accidental, like I wanted to do it, but I wasn't sure why. I felt like something was missing, but I didn't quite know what it was. I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. But there was something internally motivating me to do this, to try it, to take a different approach, and knowing that I couldn't do it by myself and that I needed help and support from others.
Mm-hmm. And there's still so much stigma around this, Tim. And I'm now a counselor and therapist and coach myself, and I'm working for a company in Singapore. And just out of curiosity, I thought, well, let's see if I check in here as a location on Facebook, and while they have many customers every day there, because there's 15 therapists who's working there, there was a handful of people over the last few years in total who checked in that they are there on the location. If this was a spa or a retreat, or it was a gym or an ice bath, you will have tens of thousands checking in because it's cool. So people are really not talking about it, but you are here today, Tim, and helping us to break that stigma around that we can talk about it. It is okay to seek help when we're going through a divorce. Any message you want to pass on to any of the listeners, who many of them are men, and I know many are going through perhaps a divorce or some challenges right now?
Yeah, look, I think in its most simple, I didn't actually realise the power of creating a safety net, a support network around me, and the benefit that could have on not just my mental and emotional health and well-being, but also my social health and well-being. To have a bunch of blokes that I could rely upon, go for a run with, play sport with, move a fridge or a barbecue with, or reach out to if I was having a shitty day. You mentioned before, be curious. I would also suggest, be kind to yourself as a starting point, and try it. It's not worth forcing somebody to do something they don't really want to do, or they might find challenging and difficult. But it's something that I suppose we see a lot of at the Mongrels Men charity and guys coming along to network. But it's very hard to do it yourself, and of course that well-known saying of a problem shared is a problem halved is true. The more you share your challenges, the more supported you can be.
Yeah, and that leads us then into the men's group. Was that something you had come across before in your life? You're now running a men's group, and I've seen the pictures, and it looks absolutely wonderful of the group of men you're leading in Australia now. But had you seen that before, or that was something that you started from scratch?
Yeah, it was something that came about accidentally. In its earliest beginnings, back in 2008, it was just me and a mate that wanted to get away for a game of golf. And then, of course, the soccer team was formed. And then, as I was going through separation and divorce, I started to reach out, and others were reaching out to me to help, to make sure I was moving and connecting with others and had someone to talk to. And it was kind of a whole range of little pieces of jigsaw puzzle. So it was never really intentional. It wasn't until 2019 when I went, all of these blokes are coming from everywhere. They want to connect and they want to participate, and they're turning up and they're running up and down the beach with us, and they're having conversations. And we'd created this opportunity for guys to walk and talk up and down the beach. And we found that, walking and talking shoulder to shoulder, the more we walked, the more we talked, the deeper it got, and the deeper it got, the better it felt. So the idea wasn't we were just doing something for our physical health, we were doing something for our mental and emotional health as well, and we'd created this brave space. Looking at the statistics, the impact of men's mental health and suicide in particular here in Australia, because we lose 7 Aussie blokes to suicide every single day. I looked at that and went, well, something kind of needs to be done. I'm kind of doing something in this space already. What happens if I turn the dial up? What kind of impact can I have? So it wasn't until about 2019 that I started to look at, creating events and programs and opportunities for blokes just in my local area. And selfishly, that was mostly about me, but it was also to see what happens. And then by 2021, blokes were coming from everywhere. They were consistently turning up. They were starting to rely upon it. They were getting help and support from others within the group. And so then went about setting up the charity, which is now 4 years old. And we've grown across most states of Australia, and we get thousands of blokes turning up to our events and programs every single year.
That's absolutely wonderful, and kudos for you to making it happen. I know many are starting to are trying to start up these groups, and but then they run into challenges and they stop and give up. And especially with the men's group, also it takes a while to get that momentum. So I'm really, really pleased to hear that you have it running, because, as you said, it is absolutely vital, not only for suicide prevention, but for the everyday mental health and well-being and social health, to be with like-minded. You mentioned that you go for some beach walks and so on. Any other activities you do that you can share?
Yeah, we do a lot of walk and talks. We engage in a lot of kind of physical challenges, mainly to help raise money and awareness, also to bring our communities together. We do that both, near the coastlines and in rural and regional areas. Now, more than a third of our communities are actually in rural, remote and outback Australian regions, which is great because the challenges they face are significantly worse than those in urban and metropolitan areas. We're lucky in many cases to have beaches and sunrises to wake up to. They don't always have those opportunities, so we have to create different programs for them. But we start with just the basics, getting guys out, moving, talking, connecting, forming new social and support networks. And the idea is that they've always got somewhere to go, something to do, someone to talk to and support when they need it. And so we start with a walk and talk, the basics of movement, community, connection and conversation. Then every month, we'll run what we call a doghouse workshop, and that's where we start to stack knowledge and education on top. Give them the skills, help build the resilience toolkit so they can tap in and out of that when they need to. And then for each of our communities, we run formal mental health education workshops and programs so that we build that community of support. We start stacking knowledge and tools, and then we give them the skills and confidence and capability to know what to do, how to support themselves and how to support others who might be experiencing mental health challenges. So we build on it over time. But at the end of that, we've still got a safety net of support so that the guys can rely upon the other men in their local communities.
Beautiful work you're doing. And if any of the listeners in Australia are listening to the show, how can they get involved?
Yeah, certainly jump online, go to mongrelsmen.com, follow us at mongrelsmen on Instagram, send us a message or an email. We'd love to have you join us. That's
fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim, for coming on the show, sharing your story of the journey you've gone through and the wonderful work you're doing for the men in your community. Any final message that you want to pass on to any of the listeners out there today?
Yeah, one of the things that we quite often find is that guys have all these great intentions of being able to come along to a men's group. They might not know what it's about, what to expect. There might be a little bit of social challenges to overcome. The one thing I would probably say is it's probably best reflected in one of our community champions and in his own words. And this was some feedback we got from him from his first experience, which was, I never realized how much I needed a hug from another man. It was the best and weirdest experience all at the same time, and I will never regret it. And this isn't about sitting in a circle, holding hands and lighting candles, singing Kumbaya and confessing all of your sins. This is just about getting guys together, connecting and forming those social and support networks. So I'd encourage you to give it a try. In our case, the worst thing you'll do is walk away with a free cup of coffee, having met a bunch of blokes and having had a conversation.
Fantastic. And on that note, Tim, if anyone want to reach out to you, how can they best find you online for a conversation?
Yeah, jump online, go to mongrelsmen.com or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at mongrelsmen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks to all the listeners as well.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.